Okay, in this lesson we're going to talk about how the crisis is going to continue to deepen. Remember our last lesson we talked about the Compromise of 1850, which really doesn't satisfy anybody. It doesn't satisfy the North, who are now forced to abide by the hated fugitive slave law, which they despise. It makes them feel part of the slave trade. And of course the South doesn't like it because, they want to be able to expand slavery into the West. They don't certainly want California to come in as a free state, which has upset the balance of power in the Senate. Well, today you're going to see, another compromise. We have to talk about the KansasNebraska Act, and because here's the problem. The problem was that the Compromise of 1850 had dealt really with the land in the Mexican Cession. Okay. It did not deal with the land that was part of the original Louisiana Purchase, because remember, that was the Missouri Compromise. All right. Stephen Douglas is a senator from Illinois, and he introduces this new bill to basically take this territory and divide it into two parts, Kansas and Nebraska. All right? So, and this was originally called the Nebraska Territories. Now we're going to divide it into two. It's going to be Kansas and Nebraska. And really, Stephen Douglas is a proponent of the Transcontinental Railroad, and he really wants to build the Transcontinental Railroad in the north. But to get support for this, he has to kind of push for this idea of dividing this territory into two areas that can become future states. Okay, and what he says is, settlers in each of these territories, in Kansas and Nebraska, could decide the issue of slavery themselves. How are they going to do that? Popular sovereignty. Remember popular sovereignty? The people in the state or in the territory is going to decide if they're going to be a slave state or they're going to be a free state. All right? And this appeals to the South because they think, we might be able to get enough people into Kansas to swing the tide in our favor and make Kansas a slave state. Because remember, just to the east of Kansas is Missouri. Missouri is a slave state already. So, that's how this is going to start. Okay, so many people actually think, before I get into the arguments against, there's going to be, let's look at the arguments for. Many people thought that this is fair, right? After all, the people in the Mexican Cession, remember, California is going to come in as a free state. We're going to divide the rest of that into the Utah Territory and the New Mexico Territory. And the law, according to the Compromise of 1850, is going to allow those territories to select via popular sovereignty if they're going to be slave or free. So why isn't it fair in this other territory, right? And again, Southerners hope the slave owners from Missouri would just move west into Kansas and make it a slave state. Now, the argument against us is, hey, why are we rehashing this? We've already decided this. The compromise, the Missouri Compromise, which was in 1820, has already banned slavery in Kansas and Nebraska. Because remember, we drew that line across. Anything north of that line, except Missouri, has to be a free state. So they said, what are we doing? What are we doing here? Why are we rehashing this? We've already figured this out. All right? So they feared that this KansasNebraska Act would overturn the Missouri Compromise. Now, these people feel betrayed, and they begin to protest. And they protest this by challenging the Fugitive Slave Act. They are not going to help return slaves. So you see that this crisis is, again, just getting more and more bitter. So let's go ahead and look at this map. Okay. Remember, we have all the land now. All right. So this area right here used to be the Nebraska Territory. And that's freaking awesome, isn't it? I wish we still had that. Look, I could go skiing in the mountains and go hunting. It'd been awesome. All right, I digress. Okay, so they're going to take the whole Nebraska Territory and cut it in half right here. This area is going to be the Kansas Territory, and this area right up here is the new Nebraska Territory. All right? Here's the old Missouri Compromise line right here. Remember, if you think back, the Missouri Compromise line only applied to the land of the Louisiana Purchase because in 1820, that was the end of our border in the United States. Okay. All right. But with over here is the Mexican cession. California is already in as a free state. They've taken the rest of the Mexican cession and divided into two parts, Utah Territory and New Mexico Territory. They get to decide by popular sovereignty. Well, Stephen Douglas's new bill, called the KansasNebraska Act, is going to allow them to vote for slavery and them to vote for slavery. Remember, Missouri's already a slave state, so the South really hopes that people from Missouri are going to come into Kansas and swing the tide in favor of slavery. Okay, what actually happens, though, is going to be violence. This isn't going to be a peaceful. It's not going to be, everybody just vote. Do you want slavery or not? No, it's not going to be like that. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery people, they're going to fight for control. I mean, they're going to fight, literally fight. Violence, gunfire, bloodshed. Abolitionists, those are kind of the ultra-conservative group that want to ban slavery everywhere, are brought in from New England. And pro-slavery settlers are going to move into Kansas and mostly across the border from Missouri. These people are called border ruffians. Border ruffians. They ride across the border to intimidate, to vote illegally even. All right? And that's what happened in 1855 election. The border ruffians voted illegally. All right? For a pro-slavery legislature. So these people are coming in. They're not even legally allowed to vote there. But who's checking? They're probably standing there with guns and clubs. Who are you going to tell them they can't vote? You don't want to get shot in the head. So these border ruffians are able to come in there into Kansas and elect a pro-slavery legislature. Okay, so you got this pro-slavery legislature, and they act quickly. They actually pass laws that make it a death penalty to help a slave escape. If you're caught speaking out against slavery, you can be put in jail for 2 years. So, I mean, this is pretty hardcore, pro-slavery. Well, no, the abolitionists and the anti-slavery settlers, they're not going to accept these laws. So what happens is they elect their own governor and legislature. So for a time, there had two governments. Two governments. Oh my gosh. Who's really legally in charge? I mean, you can't have two governors. You can't have two legislatures. This is a mess. This is a disaster. And it gets worse, okay? So now there's going to be bands of pro-slavery and anti-slavery people just kind of roaming the countryside. In fact, a band of pro-slavery men raided the town of Lawrence, where the University of Kansas is today, destroyed homes, smashed the press of the Free Soil. Remember, the Free Soil is the party that wants to keep the territories free of slaves. Okay, destroy the newspaper there. But there's atrocities on the other side too. Abolitionist John Brown, who you're going to hear more about later, he actually led a band into the town of Pottawatomie Creek and hacked to death 5 pro-slavery settlers, dragged them out of their beds, and with broadswords. I mean, they don't just shoot them. They hack them to death with swords. Yikes, all right? And, of course, this killing leads to more and more violence. Both sides, engage in this kind of hit-and-run tactic, which they call guerrilla warfare. The laying in wait. And a lot of these farms and homes are, far from neighbors. You might be attacked in the middle of the night, or your cattle might be killed, or your house burnt down, or your dad shot. I mean, this is a terrible situation. In fact, newspapers out east start calling the territory Bleeding Kansas because it is so bad. This is a disaster. Popular sovereignty is not working. Here's a very famous picture of John Brown. You notice that he's carrying a rifle in one hand, a Bible in the other. He actually believes that he is a messenger of God, that he is there to do God's will, and he believes firmly that slavery is a sin and that anything he does to end slavery is justified. If that means murdering pro-slavery people, then that's okay. Right? This picture is called the Tragic Prelude, and the prelude is going to be all of these events that are leading up to the Civil War. And we are, like I said, going to hear more about John Brown later on. Okay, but violence actually even continues in the Senate, the United States Senate. You know, this should be a place of decorum and respect, but it's not. Charles Sumner, he is from Massachusetts. He is a kind of a, he's not a real, he's kind of prickly guy. But anyways, he's a leading abolitionist senator. He's not a warm, fuzzy guy. He will tell you what he thinks. So he gets up and gives a speech, and he denounced pro-slavery legislature of Kansas. He criticized his foes, especially Southern foes, especially the senator from South Carolina, Senator Butler. Okay? He doesn't hold back. Basically tells them that, you know, they're awful people. Slavery's terrible. You're a horrible person. Well, Senator Butler has a nephew. His nephew is a congressman. All right? So what happens a few days later, Congressman Brooks, who is Butler's nephew, marches into the Senate, and he has a cane with him, and he beats Sumner with his cane until he was unconscious. And I'm telling you, it takes this guy, he almost dies. It takes him almost 2 years to recover from this beating. Now, people in the North are appalled. Did I say 2 years? I meant 3 years. It's like 3 years before this guy is actually able to recover. Okay. The Northerners are just like, oh my God, look at these people. They're barbarians. They're violent. They're unreasonable. But people in the South go, hey, you know, Sumner got what he deserved. They actually send Congressman Brooks hundreds and hundreds of canes in support. Guys, I mean, this is not going to be an easy fix. I mean, I just don't see how this is going to be able to be worked out through compromise, right? It's hard to compromise on an institution that so bitterly divides people as slavery. Okay, now with the slavery, you know, really dividing, you know, the nation, the Senate, people are going to look to the Supreme Court, all right? And one of the most famous cases in Supreme Court history is the Dred Scott case. And it's a lawsuit. Okay, Dred Scott, and there's a picture of him. Dred Scott was a slave living in Missouri. He was actually owned by an Army officer who gets moved around a lot. So he moves with his owner. I believe this officer is a surgeon, too, if I remember correctly. All right? But he's in the Army. So he moved with his owner to the Wisconsin territory, where slavery is not allowed. I mean, slavery has been outlawed in the state of Wisconsin. All right? Scott, then I think he moved to Illinois, as a matter of fact, also. So then Scott, along with his owner, returned to Missouri. But then his owner died. All right? Now, Scott claims that because he had lived in free territory, he had become a free man. He has a lot of support. He has support from abolitionists, and people help him file law cases. And these cases make it all the way to the Supreme Court, and it's called Dred Scott versus Sanford. All right? And I believe, if I remember correctly, what happened is Sanford, you know, after his owner died, he was willed to another family member, the Sanfords, okay? And they want him back, and they want him as a slave. And Dred Scott says, no, man, I'm not a slave. I lived in free territory. And so that's kind of the background of the Dred Scott case. But the decision, this is what really is important. By the way, I've got to tell you, the Supreme Court, there are like 7 Southerners on the Supreme Court. So you can kind of figure out how this is going to go, all right? Okay, so as you might well imagine, the decision by the Supreme Court is going to shock Americans, especially anti-slavery Americans, all right? First of all, they rule that Scott could not file a lawsuit. Can't even file a lawsuit because he's an enslaved person. Therefore, he is not a citizen. So you can't file a lawsuit. And really, from my point of view, if that's what they believe, then that's where they should have ended it. Can't file a lawsuit, so we're not hearing it. Oh, but they go further. Okay, Roger Taney is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He and his court then also say, and by the way, slaves are property. Boom. The Supreme Court has just ruled that slaves are property. All right? And they go further yet and say that Congress does not have the power to outlaw slavery in any territory. So that means, folks, that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. The Missouri Compromise that was, started in 1820 has now been thrown out. Now, what the Supreme Court says is, okay, slaves are property. And as citizens of the United States, and these slave owners are citizens, they can take their property anywhere they want. To make a crude example, I'll say a horse, okay? If I have a horse, that horse is my property. I'm able to take my horse to Illinois or Wisconsin or to Kansas or Nebraska or anywhere I want to take my property. According to the Supreme Court at this time, slaves are property, therefore they cannot outlaw or ban owners taking their property anywhere, which means the Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional. Boom. This is a bomb that goes off. Okay, so what does this really mean? All right, as you might well imagine, the white Southerners are overjoyed. Yay! We get to keep our peculiar institution of slavery. Decision meant that slavery was legal in all the territories. Forget popular sovereignty, right? It's legal in all the territories. Now, if states have already decided for themselves, if the state has outlawed slavery in that state, then guess what? It's illegal because the states have decided. But territories are not states. Kansas isn't a state. Nebraska is not a state. Utah Territory, New Mexico Territory aren't states. That means slavery can spread in there. Now, African Americans, as you might well imagine, are going to be, oh my gosh, they're going to be crushed. They condemn the ruling, as you might well imagine, and they turn to their white neighbors and friends and say, help us end slavery. Help us, all right? White Northerners are shocked, okay? They always hoped, that slavery could be kept in the South. It would eventually just die out, it'd be overcome by maybe new technology or, since they can't spread it out, they can't acquire new land, eventually slavery is going to die out. But no, this means that slavery can now spread anywhere it needs to. So there you go. That is the KansasNebraska Act and the Dred Scott decision. All right? This crisis is worse. Remember I told you a long time ago, Thomas Jefferson said that we have the wolf by the ears, and the wolf is slavery. And we can't let it go, and we're not going to be able to hang on. All right? And the wolf is just about slipped away.